I was one of the judges this year, but also I was the winner of last year's competition. So I feel like I'm uniquely placed in that I've now seen the process from both sides. Racism. It's such a loaded word, isn't it? Such a controversial subject, a minefield, but one we can't shy away from. When people think about racism, they often think of the overt forms, like name-calling and other types of abusive behaviour. But true racism is in the everyday. It's in the language we use, in the choices we make. People of colour in the UK are typically very aware of their race, and people's reactions to it and opinions of it every single day. I met a woman recently who grew up in Trinidad, and we were talking about race, and she said to me, you know, I never even thought about the colour of my skin until I came to England. And that really struck a chord with me because I was born here and I've had to think about the colour of my skin for as long as I can remember. And I am and have always been acutely aware of people's perceptions of me because of it. Now, work constitutes a huge part of our adult lives. And sadly, one of the most prolific, most damaging, most pervading forms of racism is institutional racism. Until 2 years ago, I worked for, arguably, the most notoriously institutionally racist organisation in our country, the Metropolitan Police Service. In fact, I trained just around the corner from here. And last week I did a talk at a local school, and I made that exact statement. I then went on to share my experiences of racism in the police force. And when I'd finished talking, a woman approached me and she said, my daughter's a police officer and she's not racist. And that for me highlighted one of the biggest problems we face when trying to tackle institutional racism. The misguided belief that to label an organisation as institutionally racist is to call every single employee of that organisation a racist. But that's just not true. Institutional racism is about the policies, the procedures, and the culture of an organisation, and how they ultimately create a working environment in which people of colour feel like outsiders, feel less than, feel voiceless. And through society's reluctance to accept institutional racism even exists, we essentially allow those hostile environments to thrive. An example, I now work for my local council, and since the pandemic, we've switched to working from home permanently. As part of the new working from home policy, my employer decided that it would be a great perk to allow employees to spend up to 3 months a year working abroad. They drew up a list of countries called the Green List, which essentially was a list of countries that require no additional permissions should an employee wish to spend 3 months working there. Great. They simply have to tell their line manager where they're going and they can get on a plane. If, however, a country is not on that list, then the employee would have to go through an extensive application process, which would need to pass through several layers of management before permission was granted, and if it was even granted at all. This process could take weeks and would probably result in many employees not even bothering because of the hassle. Now, can you guess how many countries on that green list were non-white countries? None, exactly. And this policy had made its way all the way to the leader of the council before, luckily, the chair of the BAME forum caught wind of it and politely explained why it was problematic. Well, let's be real, why it was basically racist. Needless to say, they're now redrafting that policy and updating the green list. But that is the sort of thing that people of colour are facing in the workplace, alongside the more typical forms of racism, on a near daily basis. And that is the sort of thing that we really need to fight to change. And in much the same way that work is a huge part of adult life, school is a huge part of our children's lives. And our children are facing many of the same challenges that we are. Sadly, racism is a learned behaviour, and there are still parents out there actively teaching their children to have their own prejudices. I remember, my husband will remember, when my son was around, I think he was 9 or 10, he had a girlfriend, as a lot of them do at that age. And she was a white girl. And one day she came into school and she said to my son, "We have to break up. I told my dad about you, and he said, I'm not allowed to be your girlfriend because you're black." Needless to say, he was absolutely devastated. And honestly, it broke my heart. Off the back of that, my husband and I ended up having one of our many conversations about race with our children. And what a position to be in, to have to explain to your little child the cruel and unjust way that the world sees them. And alongside this overt racism that even my own children have faced, the education system is putting obstacles in the path of children of colour. They are more likely to be labelled troublemakers, for instance, even when their behaviour is indistinguishable from that of their white counterparts. They're also, due to societal inequalities, more likely to face poverty and to be exposed to crime, to have less access to health and mental health services, and most of all, mental health services, all of which has an effect on their self-esteem, their health and mental health, their opportunities, and most of all, the likelihood for them to succeed in life. Now, since the murder of George Floyd in 2020, the world, it seems, has woken up and started to talk about race, and I mean really talk about it, about the inequalities people are facing, and also about racism itself. I mean, finally. It's been so refreshing and so inspiring to be a part of these conversations. After all, sharing our lived experiences is how we create empathy, and creating empathy is how we affect change, real change. But it's been 2 years now, and these conversations are starting to dwindle, and we can't let that happen. We need to keep the conversation alive, keep it fresh, and keep it relevant. And that is where Black and White and the fantastic work being done by the Black and White team can really start to make some waves. Poetry is, and has always been, about storytelling. For generations, poetry has been used as a tool to start conversations. It has the power to be controversial, yes, but also disruptive, and most importantly, inspirational. Black and White is no exception. Judging the competition this year has been truly inspiring. So many voices, so many stories, and all told in such powerful and meaningful ways, as we've heard some of those tonight. How can it not? The emotion in each and every poem that we read this year was palpable. So to all the entrants, whether you placed in the competition or not, I want to encourage you to continue to write, to continue to share, and therefore to continue to inspire. Our stories are important, and it's only through telling them and telling them often that we can start to be heard. This is how we rise. I'm going to finish now by reading one of my poems. Actually, this morning I made a last-minute change to which one I was going to read because I felt that this one was slightly more fitting. It's called Storytelling. It's his story and her story and my story too. And today I tell it in the way that I choose. It's in the way that I enunciate my T's. Make sure I thank you when I please. Extend abundant courtesies while I smile a smile through gritted teeth. For I am us, for I am we. For never once am I just me. But I tell it too in the simple act when I shave my hair, then grow it back, thick and black and unrelaxed, reclaiming what I used to lack, a confidence in baseline facts. In fact, an honest held belief, the grounding that every story needs. It's taken seed, its roots run deep, deeper than tangled webs of weave, deeper than how our skin's perceived. We're stronger than even we believe, and our beauty shines when our minds are free. And I tell my tale in the books I read, in the gilded dreams between their scenes, and in the wealth of hope and truth I reap from knowledge soaked and gorged and steeped. I tell it in every verse I pen, between the lines where I don't pretend, in the awkward silence, golden then, when I call them out, both foe and friend, and they squirm and rage and squirm again. But in the end, the way my story's spun is in what I choose to teach my son, and in everything my daughter knows, in how I choose to feed his goals, and how I work to shape her mould, how I pave his ways and spur her on to battles not yet won, that began as many have begun, on the same sticky floor I was once upon. Thank you.